Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another text going through Ephesians. Today, last week we did marriage, and he continues on his family dynamics, his family household rules, as they like to call it in the theological world. And here we're going to deal with two issues: how children and parents deal with each other, and in the family unit, there was also the household servants, which were just as important in dealing with on a day by day. So I think of this as the family dynamics of that world. And the family unit was the central part of the Roman world. That's where all life happened. Unlike our world where family is kind of an aside, this was the central part. Now, before we get into the family, how it worked, we need to understand the radical nature of Paul's letter. We need to really understand that there is a complete different understanding before Paul of how fathers and children relate, and just as there was with husbands and wives. So I'll go through a little bit of a history here. At the head of the Roman family was the pater familias, who exercised sovereign authority over all members of the family. The autocratic character of the patra potestas manifested itself not only in the father's right to punish, but also in his, this is a tough word, in his inu vitae nexque, killing the newborn, exposing of the children. So what that means is when he killed the newborn, he would put them on rocks. He alone had the right to do that. The paterfamilias has a full right over the disposal of his children as slaves and other things. So that was the world they lived in. The father was a very scary person in the sense of, if he wanted to, he could destroy without any problem. That was the kind of power that he had in that culture. William Barclay also adds, a Roman father had absolute power over his family. He could sell them as slaves. He could make them work in his fields, even in chains. He could take the law into his own hands, for the law was in his own hands, and punish as he liked. He could even inflict the death penalty on his child. And that's also John Stott ended that one. So this is an incredible reality of what's going on. We have this reality of this very, very toxic environment. Now, remember the husbands, they often had more than one woman, as we talked about last week. Well, now they also have authority in such ways that parents could never dream of today. And it's all father, it's patriarchal. So, in the ancient world, there was advice given to children. There was advice given to wives. But as you can imagine, there was never advice given to fathers. Okay? That's what makes Paul so radical. He knows he can't change the system from within. So what he does is he takes the system that is and he Christianizes it. He revolutionarily changes the hearts of the people and the way they're to interact, because he couldn't come and destroy the family system. That was very structure, the very foundation of Rome, and Rome itself would collapse. But if he came in and he changed the dynamic of the family structure, of the intent, that would be what he would really be a radical thing. So he begins by talking to children. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. Now it's interesting. Remember he said, wives, submit to your husbands as in the Lord. So the obeying of parents in the Lord means because of his power, yes, but also through his means of sacrificial love, of submission, of giving self to the other. And this is very shocking, because it's not submit to your parents because you're under your dad. He's actually changing who's really in charge to Jesus Christ of these children. For this is right, honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. There's much debate about that. But one of the promises that is within this, and I won't get into all the debate around this, suffice to say, Paul is right to say, this will go well for you and you will inherit the land. This is an old Torah promise. And clearly, with now it being an international church and the land, it no longer being a land-based religion, he's meaning this will go well for you. And it makes sense. If you honor your father and mother, look at dysfunctional families, how well they go and how messed up people come. Families that generally honor each other and respect each other do better. That's just common sense. That it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not, now he goes, okay, that was it. That's all he says to the children. Now he's going to do something that has never been happened in the ancient world that we're aware of. If there is a manuscript where somebody was telling fathers what to do, I can assure you it's been long burned. So, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Here's a sense that children now have values. They did not have values. In the Roman world, they were often not naming their children till 5 because of the high levels of children's death because of the reality of the medical system back then and childbirth issues, and they would often kill once they realized the child had a deformity or something. So they had no value or rights till at least 5 years old. And really, they didn't gain any standing until they were 12. And then they're getting ready to move out of the house and get married potentially. So fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So he's saying you're not there to snap and order them around, but to teach them, to disciple them, the discipline and instruction of how do you love your neighbor, how do you respect, how do you submit. This is very different than the Roman world. This is an incredible revolutionary. So he's saying I'm not going to switch who's in charge. The father's in charge. And you should, children, because you want to be like Christ, submit as Christ did. But this doesn't mean that your life will be hell because you have a megalomaniac or a malevolent father that's involved. This is a situation where he's also talking to this father saying, no, you have to now raise them as Jesus Christ's, as little Jesus. And you have to demonstrate that. And that also means sacrificing for them, mercy to them, grace, rather than, provoking them to anger by ordering them around. All right. Bondservants. Now he switches over to the bondservants. Now this is a very, very touchy one because people say, well, is Paul here saying slavery is okay? Well, here he's talking about household doulos, which is household servant. And it was a little different than the slavery, say, that you may have read about in America. Number one, it wasn't race-based. Number two, it was often used as a means of the economy keeping going. And most people didn't abuse their slaves because, frankly, that was their workers. That was their dishwasher. That was their cleaning person. And it would be as stupid as beating up your vacuum. I mean, that's how they looked at it, to be fair. But Paul has an issue here. He can't overcome slavery, the slavery system. That's the whole Roman world. But what he can do is change the hearts, and through that, undo. This is the radical nature, just like he did with marriage. He can undo what it means to be an authority, what it means to be under authority in a Christian environment, which then becomes one of respect and like Christ. Bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling. That's nothing new there. With a sincere heart, as you would Christ. So again, you've got this always with Christ. In other words, don't be sneaking around doing things. Do it as if you were doing it to your Lord. Because that's what we're supposed to do to each other. It's not just bondservants. Not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but as bondservants to Christ. Because ultimately, you're not their bondservant. You're Christ's bondservant. Temporarily in this world, you work for them. You do your work for them, but do it with high integrity as if for Christ, because you're really working for Christ, not for them. He owns you. They don't. All right. Doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord, not to man. So he flips this on his head and says, no longer are you worried about them. You're doing this because you love Christ. Your fear and trembling comes to Christ. That you're doing the right thing for Christ, that you're doing your job right for Christ. And, you can't help but think of the Joseph story where he comes in basically as a slave and he is raised up in Egypt because he does things for Yahweh. This is what he's kind of playing at. And that is the important point, that it changes the heart of the worker rather than being seen as a nothing and owned by this human being who may or may not be benevolent or malevolent. They are actually owned by Jesus Christ and are temporarily working for this person. So let's work at it as if it's Christ, because that's the witness we want to give. knowing that whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from his Lord. In other words, when you're working in this slave, bondservant, household slave environment, the Lord is not without giving graces and riches and whatever you love to empower you, but also in the age to come. And so he will receive back from this, from the Lord. In other words, the work you're doing now, you may not see the fruit now, but if you work for the Lord will recompense you. And life is so short that, trust me, it's better to do it that way. Whether he is a bondservant or free, he will do this. Masters, now this never happened. Masters were not told to do anything. They could do whatever they want. Do the same thing to them and stop your threatening. So now he wants to take the masters down to the point of a brother eventually, a Onesimus in Philemon, the famous book where the slave runs away. That's exactly what he's trying to look at him as a brother. He's overturning the slavery concept, not the system. System's too big. By each Christian home changing the way they interact with each other. Remember, this would be a Christian home with servants, knowing that he who is both their master and yours in heaven. So now he places them beside them, their master and his. So that means he is beside them ultimately in the heavenly economy. He works right beside them, and that there is no partiality with him. So in other words, this God wants the sons and daughters to honor and obey their parents in Christ, as long as it fits in that way. He wants the parents to not lead to anger these children, but to build them up and teach them in the way of Christ, which is service and love and hope and truth. And then he goes to these household servants and says, no, you work for them as if you're working for Christ, because that's who you're actually working for. And if you don't get paid off here and you're 45, they probably live 30 to 45 years. In eternity, you'll be paid off. And then he flips over to the masters and he says, and now you work with them. You're their equal. You're under Christ just like they are. And you've got to stop threatening and all of that, because you need to know that in their master, in God's economy, there's no partiality. If you treat them badly, then they will be above you. And that there is no partiality with him, because our master is together in heaven. This is just a continuation of the marriage section, isn't it? Where there's just take the low road, build the other up. And if you do that, harmony happens. All right. Questions? At what point might Paul's imperative for children to submit and honor parents be overlooked by children wanting to be faithful? In other words, is there a line where in obeying the parents, the children have to say enough's enough? I can't do that because it crosses a certain line. What line might that be? You might think about that. How might Paul's imperative to parents today be countercultural? The way they treat their children. And I wonder, and I think about this, I think about how children are spoiled in our culture. And what would Paul think of that? Because that's not discipleship, and that's not leading them into the way of Christ, that's for sure. All right. And number 3, how is Paul revolutionary in his statements to household slaves and owners? How might that translate in today's labor environment? All right. Thank you very much.